Yesterday I got to fulfill one of my bucket list dreams, which was to go on a boat in the Allegheny, Ohio, and the Monongahela there, the Three Rivers section of Pittsburgh, and celebrate Mass. And not only celebrate Mass, but celebrate Mass with 37 couples, a bunch from here, a bunch from other parts of Pittsburgh, and our Renew the I Do ministry, the foundation that is trying to cheer on married couples so that marriages aren't just surviving, but they're actually thriving. And what a better way to do that than with a terrible towel as the priest up there cheering on these amazing couples that we got to float around Pittsburgh with before the preseason Steeler game, which was very uneventful. But the other part was very eventful and very meaningful. In fact, we began our boat ride just in front of Heinz Field, at the head of the Ohio, at the source of where the Ohio flows and starts from. It says here, Jesus went into the region of Caesarea Philippi. Now, at this point, most of us just fall asleep and say, who cares? Does it really matter where he was? Well, if you ever go to the Holy Land, it really does matter. Caesarea Philippi, and in fact, where this happened, is at the head of the Jordan River. It's at the very source of where the Jordan River begins. And it's interesting that Jesus would choose this site to make this famous and historic proclamation. So if you're following at home, you could circle that. Caesarea Philippi. Why would Jesus choose the source, the beginning of the Jordan River, to talk about the beginning of this church that he is founding on Peter? When we got onto the boat yesterday, the captain got on and said, "This boat has never sunk." I'm like, boy, that's a tough way to begin. And you know, they said that about the Titanic. And they say that about a lot of human endeavors. And it's easy sometimes, because I agree, to look at the church as a mere human institution, kind of like the democracy in the United States, or a NFL football league, or IBM, or all these other great human endeavors that aren't guaranteed to last forever. But the church, because it's this institution founded by Christ, is something that's guaranteed, just as the heart of Christ, the word of Christ, the sacraments of Christ, and the very life of God guarantees that divinity, the eternal dimension to what we know as church. Thus, you see, when something important happens, usually those who are affected get changed. And in Simon's case, it becomes now not just Simon anymore, but he's called Rocky, Peter. And although Rocky Bleier definitely was the bedrock of a great football team, Peter being called Rocky. In other words, this concept of rock. Now, that might sound like, why in the world is he calling a guy rock? Again, we go back to Caesarea Philippi, and at the source, at the very beginning of the Jordan River, is this really cool wall. It's a small little mountain, and it's all rocks. And when I went there, I was thinking, boy, that'd be cool to rock climb it, because you actually could. They have some good handheld things, but you have to go backwards a little bit too, and that's where my abilities would not be able to match it. But you could also rappel down this. And so what it is this place where Jesus was doing this was actually a temple dedicated to the God of rock. But aren't you glad we've progressed? We don't worship rocks. We don't worship rock and roll or any of that anymore. We've really gone beyond pagan worship. We don't do that anymore. Boy, glad we've got where we are now. But at any rate, this place that was hewn for worship of rock is kind of this mountain of rocks. And as you could climb it, it's really cool. It's like a very sheer climb. And then you go into this little cave that was hewn out where they would do worship of the God of rock. And so it's in that setting that Jesus Christ then gives over these authorities, this special authority of the key, the keys to the kingdom. And obviously Jesus, looking back and knowing what the importance of a king, and then if the king leaves, he leaves a prime minister in charge, The key to the kingdom was the opening and closing of the very walls and the surroundings of safety. It's kind of like your garage door. You know, when I was little, it was really cool. The invention of the garage door clicker was quite a masterpiece. I thought it was one of the greatest inventions of all time. And as little kids, we used to fight of who got to hit the button to get the door to go up, into the garage. And we used to love that battle because that was the key to the kingdom. You could open up that, then you had the power to get into the garage, and that meant you could get into the house. And this one time, my dad said that we all wanted a dog in our house. We all wanted a German Shepherd. And so he said, Dad, can we get a German Shepherd? And he goes, when I get back from St. Louis, we'll get a dog. And we thought, great. When are you going to St. Louis? He said, that's the catch. I'm never going to St. Louis. I have no plan to go to St. Louis. I, in fact, will never go to St. Louis. Well, 3 years later, after those wonderful words, 3 years, 25 days, and 56 minutes, to be exact. Now I'm making that up. But at any rate, his brother, my Uncle Bill, calls us and says, do you know where your father is? He is in St. Louis, and he gets back from St. Louis tonight. Just wanted to let you know. So when the master of the house returned and he hit that button to open up the garage, we had these posters there that the door the car had to drive through was, welcome home, Dad, bow, wow, wow. And he drove in. And yes, he did get us a German Shepherd. He stuck to his word. And we had a German Shepherd, not called St. Louis, but Jess. And it was a great dog. We loved our little big German Shepherd dearly. But the authority of the house, the authority of the kingdom symbolized in the keys or the garage door opener. What in the world is Jesus doing here? He's conferring his very divine authority in human hands. And in doing that, he's not saying that Peter is sinless. In fact, many times Peter would be called the son of a devil. Good luck with that phrase, So he's not saying, Peter, you're perfect. He is saying that there are some infallible gifts that the Pope will finally get, but it doesn't mean that he's perfect. There's a difference. And that's what's such a treasure about our church in areas of faith and morality. We can count on that divine authority. And even more than that, we can count that this church was not invented by Thomas Edison. It wasn't begun by a group of guys that got together in D.C., Philadelphia, and fought for freedom. All those things could be good. But this church was founded by Jesus Christ, the Son of God. And the keys to the kingdom, the key to this whole passage only makes sense when Jesus asks, well, who do you, not just who does everybody else say? Many times in our Catholic walk, we can always hear people say, yeah, the church this, the church that, and you can get on the same side as them and start punching the church right where it counts, and that's all wonderful. But the question isn't what other people say about the Catholic Church and Jesus Christ say. The question is, who do you say? Who do I say that is? Because at the end, it's not going to matter what they say at Denny's or down at the Post-Gazette or on CNN or anything like that. That's not going to be very important. When we die and we get in front of our Creator, it's going to be, this is what you said Jesus Christ, my Son, was in his church. That's the question we all need to be asking. And you see, Jesus Christ sets this setting on purpose so that all of us realize that this is not just some human institution. And there is no doubt, I'm the first one to say it, as a priest, I am a sinner. And you can look at our history of bishops and popes, and you got plenty of scoundrels in that grouping. Plenty of them. So much so that even, 500 years ago, one of the greatest artists of all time, Michelangelo, he's doodling in a little place called the Sistine Chapel. Maybe you've heard about it. And he doodles in there, he doodles bishops in hell. And many of us probably deserve that. But that does not mean that the church does not have that divine covering and grace. It does not mean that the boat of the church will sink. There's no doubt that society can splash us. Internally, we can try to drill holes in the boat. We can do everything we possibly think we can. But if God's behind it, if it's his Spirit, his Son, his Word, his sacraments, his holiness, then we're in a boat that, sure, sometimes brings water in, but in the end is truly unsinkable. Let us today maybe answer that question as Peter had to. Because in the end, that is the fulcrum of the church. That is the key to opening the keys in the kingdom. To recognize that Jesus Christ is Lord, Son of God. And with that divine power, he confers it as a king on his prime minister when the king leaves. To give that authority to the Pope and by extension to those who are in communion with him.